Hey guys, Chris here. Today I'm going to be doing a review of the Crucible of Storms progress. It was obviously a disappointing performance from us, as we always aim to win, but I'll talk you through how the bosses were for us and how things went. Due to the raid being a 2-boss filler raid, we expected it to be a rather short race. We semi-expected the first boss to die within an hour or two, with maybe the last boss taking 2 to 3 days. But we were obviously very wrong. The first boss, Restless Cabal, has a very interesting mechanic in that you can stack up a damage increase that also reduces your max health. It caps out at 9, meaning you can have a 90% damage increase and only have 10% of your max HP. We knew that this could be key to the fight, so we came up with a strategy that revolved around 4 disc priests using the talent Luminous Barrier, and rotating who used the Luminous Barrier and also rotating who used the Raptures to cover all the raid-wide damage. In theory this plan was great, but there was one thing that we didn't account for, and that thing is Blizzard. There is a bug in the game that still exists right now, where if 2 damage events happen really close to each other, the second damage event will actually just completely ignore any absorbs the person has, so you can die through absorb. This was the case with the crushing doubt raid damage. It was very frustrating to come up with a good way to abuse this damage increase mechanic, only to be halted by Blizzard's stupid bug. The bug was never fixed, it still exists. Instead, they did kind of a band-aid fix by changing the crushing doubts to no longer deal damage within such a short time to each other. They increased the gap, they made like a gap between the debuffs, so the bug didn't occur. Sadly, this band-aid fix came really late, even over 24 hours since the bosses were released, and we did in the end switch back to the 4-priest strat on a kill. We also had another unique idea for this boss, which we had practiced on heroic mode, which was to not activate the Storm Relic at all, and give the bosses a 300% damage increase. The way we planned to survive this was our 2 Brewmaster monks using their big fortifying brews, and with the power of stagger we would out-heal it. The plan with the caster mob that Scribe, our mage, was tanking was to just blink around the room and just not get hit, and the boss would just chase him around the room. This was a very risky strategy because one misstep from Scribe and he would get one shot, and the tanks obviously were going to be very spiky even with stagger, even with their brews. 300% damage increase is not a small thing. In the end, although this didn't really wipe us much, we decided this strategy was too risky to waste our good pulls on. That when we finally got there, we didn't want to wipe to that, so we scrapped it in the end. We ended up killing the boss around 15 hours after Pieces did, and while we were obviously frustrated and demoralized, we knew we were still in the race, as most races come down to the last boss and how you perform there. And in Method, we usually always shine on the end bosses. Within a few pulls of the boss, we knew uu'nat was going to be a very hard boss. The unstable resonance, which is similar to the Star Augur sign mechanic, comes very often, and simply from seeing that, we knew this boss was not dying in 1 or 2 days. This meant we had to take our first of many hits on the roster, and decided to swap out our MDI players straight away, as we knew we would have to swap them out eventually anyway because of the MDI Cup happening on the Saturday. The way the unstable resonance works exactly is that all DPS and healers would get marked with one of 3 signs, either Storm, Ocean or Void. They then had 12 seconds to run to the corresponding relic, and if they failed to run to the relic within 12 seconds, or they collided with a player of a different relic mark, they would explode, killing themselves and players around them. This mechanic caused us the most wipes by far. It comes very frequently in the fight, and before the first round of nerfs, it often overlapped with other abilities. To try and counter the mechanic, we used a priority system. So the Ocean Mark players would go zooming towards their relic, we call that commando mode, they could just go, and the other monks had to give them priority. And then Void also had priority over Storm. So Storm was usually last, but this isn't a problem for most of the fight because when Scribe has the Storm relic, he actually was just running around collecting the Storm guys while they stood still. So the Storm guys in the earlier phases didn't really have to move much at all. Of course, in Phase 3 and for a lot of Phase 2, this isn't really possible. So, as I mentioned, there was a nerf after around 400 pulls that made the fight a lot easier than it was. The change was that the Oblivion Tears, which are the purple zones that heal the boss, cannot spawn during the marks. This change made the marks a lot easier, as before you would sometimes have to time your running into your relic around the void zone spawning, so they did not spawn it on top of the relic. There was also another hotfix shortly before this that changed the time of the unstable resonance to 15 seconds instead of 12 seconds, so you have 3 seconds longer to complete it. I assume Blizzard saw from our streams that having so many wipes before we even saw Phase 3 meant that unstable resonance timings were just a lot harder than they intended. I mean, we just had hundreds upon hundreds of wipes before we even got to the last phase. on what was supposed to be a 2-boss raid. So I'm guessing they kind of saw how much us and the other guilds were wiping for this, and that's why they nerfed it. So after these changes, phase 1 became a lot easier, but of course, with the nature of the mechanic, we were always going to have some random wipes every, 10 pulls or something in phase 1. Our next hurdle in phase 2 was interrupts. We had a lot of wipes to interrupts, or at least a lot more than we should have had. We had a weak aura for interrupts, but still many times we had them go through. This is the second mechanic that we as a guild played below our standard that we aim for. In retrospect, I think we would have probably spent more time practicing the interrupt assignments on Heroic Week, just completely practice them in different situations, make sure everything's set up, we're not going to fail it at all. But apart from the interrupts, phase 2 was very easy, and it was probably the easiest phase. We didn't take any significant storm damage or the damage reduction effect that it applies in phase 2 due to us using shamans to suicide with the storm relic and then ank. Essentially, the shaman would press the relic right as the mobs were hitting 25% health, run into the darkness outside the room, which deals a lot of damage to you, take your health down, and then let the storm finish you off once you're back inside the room. At around pull number 500 or 600 or so, Blizzard decided to nerf the damage of the storm to plays by 20%. I think this is because, again, they probably saw a lot of guilds using shamans to suicide with the relic, and they don't want it to have to be the way that you do the fight. And actually, before this change, we were even using a resto shaman with Ankh Totem, so that Scripe could suicide a relic at the end of phase 1 too, instead of us using the tank bubble and healing through it. By the way, at this point, the MDI Cup had come and gone, so we were actually able to get the MDI players back into the raid. Sadly, only a day or two later, a number of our other players also had to start leaving, as they and we didn't expect this 2-boss raid to last this long. We started losing, I think it was like 4 or 5 players to holidays, weddings, returning to work, so yeah, even with the MDI Cup finished, the roster issues continued. So phase 3 initially was one of the hardest phases I have actually ever seen. It reminded me of pre-nerf Guild Jaden from Tomb of Sagaris. For those that don't know, the Insatiable Torment mechanic makes a player unhealable by any normal healing effects, and makes them take constant ticking damage. The only way this player can be healed is to stand on allies and essentially steal health from them. This on its own is not a difficult ability, however, they were coming every 30 seconds and could go on anybody, melee, ranged or healer. Also in the last phase, the lasers and the void zone baits are coming much more often than in phase 1, so at some point we were actually getting lasers, void zone spawning, the star sign mucks coming, all at the same time, while having Insatiable Torment up, and also the raid becoming hostile to each other, not being able to heal each other, and taking a large amount of raid damage. So it was just really insane. The nerf I mentioned earlier, where they made the void zone not come at the same time as the marks, was one of the changes that made this phase a lot more doable. However, the phase was still insanely hard, and it wasn't till very late in progression, when we had already had the boss, at sub 20%, that they made the most impactful change, which was to make the torment come every 45 seconds and not every 30 seconds. This change looks small, maybe you think it's just 15 seconds difference, but it's actually massive. It means that after 3 minutes, you would only have 4 people with the Insatiable Torment instead of 6. However, one problem remained. Whenever healers or melee got the torment, it was really, really bad. We were at times running only one melee, which was Jimmy on the Demon Hunter. So if Jimmy got the mark, he would actually have to come and fell rush out and stand AFK with the range camp, which was always a nice surprise to have Jimmy flying towards you and then stealing your health. But yeah, and then obviously he's not doing DPS for that time. Then he goes back in. A short while later he's going to come out again. Really bad if it went on a melee. Obviously this is a significant DPS loss, but even worse was getting on a healer, because the tank killing last phase can be very spiky, can be very scary when there's adds up for a long time, and having a healer being constrained to staying with other players, which can keep them out of range, or of course eventually you can't keep all the torments alive, people are going to die to it, is a mechanic that eventually kills you. And losing a healer when you really need healing, we were only 3 healing, is very, very bad. We could have played this mechanic a lot better, but we decided to just try and cheese it with Warlocks. Warlocks are OP as hell for the last phase. They can teleport over the lasers, which reduces the damage they take massively. They have insane self-healing with Drain Life, and they also have Soul Leech, which is a constant passive absorb effect on themselves, which heavily negates the amount of leeching they need to do when they themselves get the Insatiable Torment. As you can see, we brought in almost every Warlock we could, simply because if a Torment went on a Warlock, it was just safe, it was fine. You never panicked when it went on a Warlock. But if it went on a melee, one of the non-Warlock DPS, aka the Shamans, or a healer, it was very, very much a problem. We had a 2% wipe on the Wednesday, but we didn't kill the boss until Friday, a few hours after Pieces killed it. We were unable to raid until late, ever since the Wednesday due to attendance issues, and due to a mixture of bad play and new people seeing the fight or people on new classes, we struggled to get consistently to phase 3 within those few days. We really should have killed the boss Wednesday and got the world first then. However, we didn't, and Pieces were able to kill the boss before us, a few hours ahead of us on the Friday. As you can see on both of our kill videos and their kill video, a key factor that you'll notice in both is that no healers got the insatiable torments on the kill. Blizzard have now nerfed the boss heavily as of this current reset, and one of the big nerfs is that the torment can no longer go on healers. This change, as well as the torment increasing to 45 seconds instead of 30 seconds cooldown, really should have been in from the start. No reasonable person can think that the last boss was reasonably tuned to begin with in its original state. While it was technically killable, we would have just been chain pulling the boss for 2,000-3,000 pulls until we just got good RNG in the last phase with who the torments was going on. And that's not really how a boss should be. Both bosses were actually very cool bosses, and the mechanics themselves were actually really interesting. However, due to uu'nat being overtuned, we had roster issues that kicked in before we could kill it, since we didn't expect it to be so overtuned, and it really put a sour taste in the mouth to lose world first, partly due to this. That being said, I really cannot take anything away from Pieces. They played exceptionally, and they outplayed us in quite a few ways. They were by far the best guild in the world for this progress. We in Method now look ahead to the Eternal Palace raid, and we've already started preparing for that so that we can win back our world first title. We're already looking at the problems, fixing the problems, and we're going to try our best in the new raid, guys. I've been Chris Potter, thanks for watching, hit the like and subscribe button if you enjoyed the video, see you next time.